Good morning, guys. I wanted to just go ahead and continue with a little bit more on Unit 4 just to kind of tie up a couple of loose ends. Again, I will post this as a file for everybody a little bit later on. That way you guys can actually see the notes from it because there's some really, really important stuff that's on here. Most of the terms that you're going to see on here were vocab words, but it does go a little bit beyond what we only did in our vocab. So on boundaries in Unit 4. So besides the kind of boundaries that you can have, like a militarized or a fortified boundary, relic boundary, you can also have boundaries that don't just separate countries, but they're actually called internal boundaries. These are boundaries that are going to be found inside of a country, and a very good example, and one that shows up often on the AP exam, is all about the boundaries such as voting districts. We have the census, which I think we've spoken about earlier on in the year, where the census is given every 10 years in the United States to get an accurate count of the amount of people in the country. And as the census is done, it collects a lot of data, not just the number of people, but also some demographic data as well. When we collect the number from the census, we use that number every 10 years to decide how much representation every single state will get in Congress. So a state that has a larger population of people will have more representation. A state that has less people will have less representation. That's obviously not true in the Senate. That's where you have 2 representatives for every state, but it's different in the House of Representatives. So a state like Florida will have more representation in Congress than in the representative portion than you're going to have, let's say, in the state of Montana. And the numbers change every 10 years based on the census. So that whole process is reapportionment. It's trying to figure out how many people are going to be represented, or how many representatives basically are going to be sent from each state to represent the people. And if the people in Florida, let's just say, have a huge out migration, like there's a lot of people that leave the state of Florida within 10 years, then we're going to lose seats in the House. If we gain a lot of people, if we have a lot of in-migration, if our numbers go up in the state of Florida, we would then, according to the census, after they count everything up, they would then put more people in the House of Representatives for us. So if you take a look at the picture that's on the screen, these are the projected numbers after the census was just given in 2020. And basically, that's the the reapportionment process is trying to figure out, based on the census, how many people are going to be representing each of the states in the House of Representatives. But then there's redistricting and gerrymandering, which all goes back to the census and reapportionment and all that. So after the census is used to count the entire population, and then they figure out how many people are going to be in the House of Representatives based on the population of the state, then every 10 years, they also get to redraw voting districts within the states. So if you take a look on the screen, you're going to see the definition of something called gerrymandering, and it has a couple of other definitions there, cracking, packing, stacking, hijacking, and kidnapping. I believe for our exam, you only need to know about what cracking, packing, and stacking is. So I'll leave the definitions obviously up there for a while. But you will need obviously what gerrymandering is and minority-majority districts. The only 2 I don't think you need are hijacking and kidnapping. So here we go. So after the census is given, don't forget that it doesn't just count population. It also has other questions on it, like, how many people live in the household, what race do you identify with, what ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. Based off of that information, all that demographic data that we can gather, there are people whose job it is to figure out, based on those demographic characteristics, which political party are they most likely going to vote for. So every 10 years, whatever political party is in power in a state when the census is given, and I'll use Florida as an example, and I'll use the Republicans just because they're in charge right now. So since the census was given in 2020, the Republicans will be able to redraw voting districts based on the new numbers. But what they can do is this. Instead of just drawing, regularly shaped, maybe square districts or whatever, or going by county to try to count everybody and evenly represent them, what happens is that a lot of times the political party who is in power will redraw voting districts to try and favor their political party. For example, if you take a look at the next slide, it's a lot easier. For example, let's just say that this represents a district, and the one all the way to the side where it says 50 people, you have red for Republican, blue for Democrat. in that district, if we didn't draw any lines, it's obviously a majority Democratic district because 60% of them are blue, that's Democrat, 40% are red. So if there was an election held where every single person there voted, every single time, if they're voting for their party, a Democrat would win. But if you go and redraw the voting districts, you can do a couple of things to see if you're able to win some different seats. For example, if you look at the example for perfect representation number 1, number 2, compact but unfair, they draw the lines to where there's 2 Republican districts and 3 Democratic districts. And that's pretty fair as far as the representation, in the area. Then you could also redraw it the other way, number 2, compact and unfair, where they make sure to draw the districts to where any time, no matter how many votes are cast, if every single person votes in the third picture in, where it says number 2, compact and unfair, if everyone votes there, then it will be Democrat every single time. A Democrat would win all 5 districts that are there. Even though there's, 4 Republicans in each of the district, even if they come out and vote every time, they will be outvoted. Then there's another type of kind of gerrymandering where you kind of redraw these voting districts to make sure that even though you're a minority, that you're still going to win even if every single person comes out to vote. And that's the last picture up here, where if I draw the districts like that, even though it's 60-40 Democrat favor, every single time, red will win the majority of the votes if I draw it like number 3. So you can, or the third, number 3, where it says neither compact nor fair, but the 4th picture over. If I draw it like that, and if I live in one of those districts where they decided to put in like 6 Republicans and 4 Democrats, however they drew it in there, they drew the same 5 districts, they just drew them in a different way and they got a different outcome. That's called gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is, it's evolved over time. It actually started back when this one guy started to draw a voting district that looks really ridiculous. It looked like a salamander. And so it's why it did that is they were trying to create a district for voting so that one political party would basically always win over another. So as far as like different gerrymandered districts, a lot of the states in the South are gerrymandered. You see a lot of gerrymandering, especially in Florida. And gerrymandering isn't quite legal. It's kind of like in a very gray area. You are allowed to, and you're supposed to, redraw voting districts every 10 years based on the census. And if you're the political party in power, you're going to want to try and make it so that your party wins all the time. But if you are doing this to make sure that you're not just trying to stay in power, but if you're disenfranchising, or that means like somebody who goes to vote, their vote won't really necessarily count. They feel like their vote doesn't count. Then they're going to stop voting. So if you take a look at some of these images, they're really weirdly shaped districts. There is no reason for Illinois' 4th or for, what was the other one? Maryland's 3rd congressional district to look like that. If you have a district like Maryland's 3rd, where you see Baltimore, and you look at all the other surrounding areas, just because the district is shaped like that, there's several problems that come with that. Besides the whole political party will be favored, is that let's just say that the representative that's elected from there lives in Baltimore. They're not going to know what the needs of the people are all the way out west. The whole district is everything that you see shaded in black. So instead of having like a compact district where, you have an idea of the people you're representing and their wants and their needs, if I'm elected from Baltimore, I wouldn't know, if there's potholes that need to be filled in the road all the way, hundreds of miles away from where I'm from. So there's several different problems that come with gerrymandering. Unfortunately, what's starting to happen is that political parties are using that to not only favor their political party and keep themselves in power, but they're also trying to disenfranchise or to try and persuade voters not to come out and vote because they almost feel like their vote doesn't count. So if I'm living in this district over here on the very far picture and I'm a Democrat and I'm living in the 1st district where there's 4 Republicans straight down, then you have 2 Republicans, and then you have the 4 Democrats. If I'm one of those 4 Democrats, no matter how many times I come out and vote, and if I get all my Democratic people in my district to come out and vote, it doesn't matter. If every Republican votes, Republicans will always win. So what's the point? Why should I go out and vote? There's several reasons why politicians do this. One of the things that is happening recently, though, is that they are starting to use this as a way to try and not only disenfranchise just different political parties, but also minorities within the community. So a lot of times they'll draw these crazy looking districts just so that they make sure they have a couple of minority people in there, of any different race, ethnicity, et cetera, but that the majority of the district, according to the census, is usually going to be voters that tend to vote for one political party over another. So these are just a couple of the things that happen as far as the impact on voters. You can have somebody who runs for election and keeps their congressional seat for basically ever, because the voters will continually vote for them. You will end up with the person elected sometimes not knowing their district that well because they don't know all the needs and the wants of all the people because they're only representing a certain portion of them and they may not be the majority. And the biggest issue is that you tend to disenfranchise so many voters based on gerrymandering. So if a if a district is drawn really ridiculously bad and you can prove in court that it is discriminatory, then they will have to redraw the district. It's a difficult case to prove, but I can tell you now that there were several of these districts that actually got challenged in court and ended up getting to be redrawn. You can take a look at some of them. I know they have the redrawn ones here for a few of them. Anyway, there's a video I'm going to post on gerrymandering if you just need a little bit better of an explanation on it. Other than that, that's it for gerrymandering for now, and a little bit on electoral geography. Just remember that you can connect the census. Every 10 years, we use that for population in order to count the population of the states, who lost people, who gained people, then to see how many people will sit in the House of Representatives based on that. And if you gerrymander the districts, you can favor it so that even if you live in a majority Democratic area or a majority Republican area, that the other political party will pretty much always gain power. So I'm going to end there on that happy note, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!